Okay, last week I talked about Gideon. We started Judges chapter 6. We went through it and talked about Gideon. And this is actually a continuation of that message. So if you didn't get to hear it, it is online, but I think this one stands alone just fine. So it's not like you're going to be missing anything if you don't listen to it. I just want to remind you a little bit of what I did last week. We talked about Gideon, Abraham, and Moses, and how some of the similarities of once God gives a promise of how he expects us to move within that promise. And so I'm going to be continuing in that a little bit. I also used the parable of the talents that Yeshua shares in Matthew, and how when we are faithful with a little, he gives us more and trusts us with that. So we'll be continuing with that. So turn with me to Judges 7. Then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the well of Harod, so that the camp of the Midianites was on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And Jehovah said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, my own hand has saved me. Now therefore proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and afraid, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead. And 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. So quick math, 32,000 people were there at the beginning. 32,000 people. Have any of you been to an MSU basketball game or seen it on TV and seen the crowd? That at capacity is 16,000. Double that. Double that, 32,000 people. And he says, well, that's too much. Well, what are they going up against? Do we remember? Turn back with me to Judges 6:5, and then I'll read 33 and 34 also. So 6:5. For they would come up with their livestock in their tents. This is the Midianites now. Coming in as numerous as locusts. Both they and their camels were without number, and they would enter the land to destroy it. And then it says in 33 and 34, then all the Midianites and the Amalekites, the people of the east, gathered together, and they crossed over and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of Jehovah came upon Gideon. Then he blew the trumpet, and the Abiezrites gathered behind him. So, this was the people. This was as numerous as locusts. How many is that? I have no idea. But I can tell you it's more than 32,000. And so, but even so, he's saying 32,000 is too much. Let's thin it down. So he thins it down to 10,000. Let's continue on in Judges 7, starting back up after verse 3, verse 4. But Jehovah said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. Then it will be that of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, the same shall go with you, and of whomever I say to you, this one shall not go with you, the same shall not go. So he brought the people down to the water, and Jehovah said to Gideon, everyone who laps from the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you shall set apart by himself. Likewise, everyone who gets down on his knees to drink, and the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people got down on their knees to drink water. Then Jehovah said to Gideon, by the 300 men who lapped, I will save you and deliver the Midianites into your hand. Let all the other people go, every man to his place. So the people took provisions and their trumpets in their hands, and he sent them away, all the rest of Israel, every man to his tent, and retained those 300 men. Now the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. Jehovah has now taken him from 10,000 men to 300. 300 men. In this, we can see that God is testing Gideon. Is he willing to do and actually follow the way he says to go? Let's look at Abraham and see if he also was tested. Let's go to Genesis 22. Remember what Abraham's promise was. Can anyone tell me what the promise of Abraham was? I didn't even remember to remind you of Gideon's promise, but we'll go back to that in a second. Abraham's promise that he would be the father of many nations, and that he would bless the nations through his family. And he would bless the nations, and those who cursed him would be cursed, those who blessed him would be blessed. So let's look at Abraham, Genesis 22, 1 through 14. Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to Abraham, and he said, Here I am. Then he said, Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son. And he split the wood for the burnt offering, and arose, and went to the place of which God had told him. Then on the 3rd day Abraham lifted his eyes, and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you. So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hand, and a knife, and the 2 of them went together. But Isaac spoke to Abraham his father, and he said, My father? And he said, Here I am, my son. Then he said, Look, the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering. So the 2 of them went together. Then they came to the place of which God had told him. And Abraham built an altar there, and placed the wood in order. And he bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of Jehovah called to him from heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. So he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not lay your hand on the lad, or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God. Since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Then Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by its thorns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place, Jehovah will provide. As it is said to this day, In the mount of Jehovah it shall be provided. In this, we see that Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son, the promise, the thing that he has been waiting his whole life for. He's now over 100 years old, and he goes and he places Jehovah above his own son and even himself. So again, we see testing. When we have a promise from God, we're going to be tested by God. Are you really going to follow through and do the thing you said you're going to do? And we can also look at Moses. I didn't pull up any verse for this, but I just wanted to remind us of the 10 plagues. as Moses was going through this, he didn't fully understand what was going on. He's thinking, okay, I'm doing this, and every time this man keeps rejecting us and keeps telling us he's going to do it, and then he doesn't. So we can look at the 10 plagues. The first plague was water to blood. Second plague was frogs. Third plague was lice or gnats, some people say. Fourth plague was flies. The fifth plague was the livestock died. Sixth plague was boils. Seventh plague was hail. Eighth plague was locusts. And ninth plague was darkness. The 10th plague was the plague of the firstborn. Now Moses' promise was that he was going to lead the people out of Israel. Or the Israelites out of Egypt, sorry. He's going to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Or the Hebrews out of Egypt, however they said it. And even with these 10 plagues, we have to remember, it wasn't completed. That wasn't the finished job. That was the testing that he went through. And the promise that Gideon had was that he was going to lead Israel out of captivity of Midian. So that was the promise. I forgot to go over that. But I also last week shared a little bit of my life, and I wanted to share one of the tests that God put our family through as we were allowing him to number our children. Many of you know that we have some adopted children, and one of the children we adopted, we knew it was going to come at a great cost. Not just money, but money was one of the things. So as we prayed about it, we trusted, and I never know how to say this. We felt that God was telling us that he was going to cover the costs. It was considerable cost. It was over a lot of money. I don't know if I want to say exactly, but through that, he always met the needs. As a cost would come up, we would have that money, and it came all the way to the end. And the day before, we were $4,000 short. And so we prayed, we fasted and we prayed. And the next day, someone that knew of our situation and knew, but didn't know, where we were at money-wise or anything, came and gave us the exact amount we needed for that day. And it tests you, but it encourages you in such a way. And so I wanted to say also, when God gives you a promise, he not only tests you, but he encourages you. Let's look at Judges 7, 8 through 15. I already read 8. Let's start at 9. 9 through 15. It happened on the same night that Jehovah said to him, "Arise, go down against the camp, for I have delivered it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah, your servant, and you shall hear what they say. And afterwards your hands will be strengthened to go down against the camp." Then he went down with Purah, his servant, to the outpost of the armed men who were in the camp. Now the Midianites and the Amalekites, all the people of the east, were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number, as the sand by the seashore in multitude. So again, we see this is a big group of people, not even numbered. And when Gideon had come there was a man telling a dream to his companion. He said, "I've had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. It came to a tent and struck it so that it fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed." Then his companion answered, Now remember, Gideon's outside listening to this. He's not in there, and they're not all conversing together, and he's not saying, hey, Gideon, listen to this. This is the enemy. Then his companion answered and said, this is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hand God has delivered Midian and the whole camp. And it was so, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation that he worshipped, he returned to the camp of Israel and said, arise, for Jehovah has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand. This encouraged Gideon so much that he took it on himself. He said, I see it. Arise, join together. We can do this. Well, he can do this, sorry. He can do this with 300 people. Let me turn back to Abraham and see if God encouraged him. Turn to Genesis 18, 1 through 15. And again, this week, I've taken all my little things out so that when I turn, you guys can turn so you can get there at the same time as me, hopefully, and follow along if you want. So Genesis 18, 1 through 15. Then Jehovah appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre, as he was sitting in the tent door, this is Abraham, in the heat of the day. So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them, and bowed himself to the ground, and said, my Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight, do not pass on by your servant. Please let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh your hearts. After that, you may pass by, inasmuch as you have come to your servant. They said, do as you have said. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, quickly, make ready 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf, gave it to a young man, and he hastened to prepare it. So he took butter and milk and the calf which he had prepared, and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree as they ate. Then they said to him, where is Sarah your wife? So he said, here in the tent. And he said, I will certainly return to you according to the time of life. And behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son. Sarah was listening in the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced in age, and Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I have grown old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord, being old also? And Jehovah said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? Saying, shall I surely bear a child since I am old? Is anything too hard for Jehovah? At the appointed time, I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I didn't laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did. He came and encouraged them, letting them know that the time has come. And Moses, let's see how he was encouraged. Let's turn to Exodus 6, 1 through 8. And honestly, I think this one, I don't know, it hit me the hardest. Then Jehovah said to Moses, now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. For with a strong hand he will let them go, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of his land. And God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am Jehovah. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, Jehovah, I was not known to them. I have also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land of the pilgrimage in which they were strangers, and I have also heard the groaning of the children of Israel, whom the Egyptians keep in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Therefore say to the children of Israel, I am Jehovah. I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will rescue you from the bondage, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. I love the way he says to Moses, I've appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but they didn't know me by my name. You do. You get to carry this. So he had to feel encouragement there. And also, as he's seen the 10 plagues as they happened, and he asked them to cease, and they ceased, the way that it happened, how Jehovah had used him in a mighty way, had to encourage him every time. So as we see these, when God gives a promise, he gives encouragement. And now let's look at the promises fulfilled. Turn back with me to Judges 7, and picking up at 15, I'll finish to the end of the chapter. I did read up to 15. Okay. And so it was, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation that he worshipped, he returned to the camp of Israel and said, Arise, for Jehovah has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand. Then he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet into every man's hand with empty pitchers and torches inside the pitchers. And he said to them, Look at me and do likewise. Watch, and when I come to the edge of the camp, you shall do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you also will blow the trumpets on every side of the whole camp, and say, The sword of Jehovah and of Gideon. So Gideon and the hundred men who were with him came to the outpost to the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just as they had posted the watch. And they blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers that were in their hands. Then the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers. They held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands for blowing. And they cried, The sword of Jehovah and of Gideon. And every man stood in his place around the camp. And the whole army ran and cried out and fled. When the 300 blew the trumpets, Jehovah set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp. And the army fled to Beth Acacia, toward Zerera, as far as the border of Abel Maholah by Tabith. And the men of Israel gathered together from Naphtali, Asher, and all Manasseh, and pursued the Midianites. Then Gideon sent messengers throughout all the mountains of Ephraim, saying, Come down against the Midianites, and seize from them the watering places as far as Beth Barah and the Jordan. Then all the men of Ephraim gathered together and seized the watering places as far as Beth Barah and the Jordan. And they captured 2 princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb they killed at the winepress of Zeb. They pursued Midian and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan. So with this, we see the fulfillment of the promise that Gideon would drive out the Midianites. Let's look at Moses and see how his promise was fulfilled. I think most of you will remember this story, if not all of you. It's in Exodus 14, 21 through 31. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and Jehovah caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on the right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went after them in the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. Now it came to pass in the morning watch that Jehovah looked down upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and the cloud, and he troubled the army of the Egyptians, and he took off their chariot wheels, so that they drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the face of Israel, for Jehovah fights for them against the Egyptians." Then Jehovah said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, on their chariots and on their horsemen." And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. And when the morning appeared, the sea returned to its full depth, while the Egyptians were fleeing into it. So Jehovah overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. Then the waters returned and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. Not so much as one of them remained, but the children of Israel had walked on dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. So Jehovah saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, when Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Thus Israel saw the great work which Jehovah had done in Egypt. So the people feared Jehovah and believed Jehovah and his servant Moses. We have to remember that the killing of the firstborn, the Passover, that was not the completion of this promise, because that got them out of Egypt, but it didn't finish the work because the Egyptians decided to pursue them again. And so this had to transpire this way, or they would have continued trying to get the Hebrews or the Israelites back. And so God fulfilled the promise in such a way that no one could claim that they did it. And Abraham, his promise continues today, but I wanted to turn to Zechariah 14 and show, I don't know that it's the completion of the promise, because again, God promised that anyone that blessed him would be blessed, and who cursed him would be cursed. Zechariah 14 talks a little bit about this at the second coming, which of course hasn't happened yet. Zechariah 14, 16 through 21. And it shall come to pass that everyone who is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King, Jehovah of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it shall be that whichever of the families of the earth do not come up to Jerusalem to worship the King, Jehovah of hosts, on them there will be no rain. If the family of Egypt will not come up and enter, they shall have no rain. They shall receive the plague with which Jehovah strikes the nations who do not come up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. This shall be the punishment of Egypt, and the punishment of all the nations that do not come up and keep the Feast of Tabernacles. In that day, holiness to Jehovah shall be engraved on the bells of the horses. The pots in Jehovah's house shall be like the bowls before the altar. Yes, every pot in Jerusalem and Judah shall be holiness to Jehovah of hosts. Everyone who sacrifices shall come and take them and cook in them. In that day they shall no longer be a Canaanite in the house of Jehovah of hosts. So what is it talking about, no rain, if they don't come? If they don't come, they're not going to be blessed. They're going to be cursed. Those who curse him will be cursed. Those who bless him will be blessed. The promise continues for Abraham. We've seen the promises both fulfilled for Gideon. The people, the Midianites were freed. Moses, the Israelites were released from Egypt. But Abraham's promise continues to this day and ultimately will be fulfilled within Yeshua. Even though he's come once, but this second time will be that completion of that promise. So, in closing, I wanted to remind you a little bit more of last week. A reminder that the talents and how when Yeshua gives you a promise or Jehovah gives you a promise that he will give you what you need to complete it and do the thing that you know he wants from you. Love your wife. Teach your children. Obey his commands. And he will give you something greater. Shabbat Shalom.